you have coined this concept, surveillance capitalism, some years ago, about 5 years ago. What does it mean?
Surveillance capitalism. Okay, so most of us understand that, capitalism has evolved over the centuries. And even though there are some enduring principles of capitalism, it takes different forms in different eras, depending on the technology and the state of society and so forth. So what's happened in our era, in the digital century, is a new presentation of capitalism, a new economic logic, a new way of creating wealth. So let me explain what that is. One of the enduring principles of capitalism is that it evolves by taking things that live outside the marketplace, outside the domain of market exchange, and it brings them into the marketplace. And it turns them into things that we call commodities, things that can be sold and purchased. Okay, so I think most of us understand industrial capitalism, which dominated the 19th and 20th centuries. Industrial capitalism took nature from outside the marketplace and it brought it in and it turned it into things that we call land, things we call real estate, forests that could be purchased and sold, rivers that were repurposed as sources of power that could be sold and purchased. So nature became commodified, and that is what drove industrial capitalism and allowed it to create so much wealth. Okay, now fast forward into the digital century, the 21st century. Capitalism is scanning the horizon, looking for what is the new source of raw materials, the new source of free assets that we can turn into commodities. And what it hit upon was us, private human experience. This happened first at Google, but let me just explain it in principle initially. What it means is that our private human experience became redefined as a free source of raw material to be claimed by the new processes of computerization, translated into data, behavioral data. Those behavioral data now flow through all kinds of supply chains. For example, the screen that I'm talking to you through a screen right now, this screen is a supply chain interface. And the systems through which we are recording and the third-party applications that those systems also feed, all of these are ecosystems of supply chains that are scraping some data from our interaction and flowing it through these pipes, through these supply chains, into 21st century factories.
Which kind of factories are those?
What is a 21st century factory? It's a computational factory. The tech companies call it artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, machine learning. These are the new computational factories. So our data flow into these new factories where they are analyzed, where they are computed. And like every factory, these factories produce products. But in the case of surveillance capitalism, the products that they produce are predictions of our behavior, computational fragments.
Shoshana, let me pose you a question in this point. You have analyzed very carefully the case of Pokemon Go, the game, the virtual reality game that many people all over the world were involved some years ago. Could you explain this case, because it's very easy to understand the implications of what you are describing when we understand the implications of Pokemon Go?
Yes, I agree. That's a great example. Think about this. What surveillance capitalism produces are predictions of our behavior. These predictions are sold to business customers. Now, as most folks know, the original prediction product was the click-through rate. And the original marketplace where these predictions about our behavior were sold were markets for online targeted ads. Mm-hmm. And this is when advertisers learn not to decide where their ads should be placed, but to buy the prediction from Google's black box, the click-through rate. And the black box tells the advertiser where to place your ad, where that user is most likely to click on your ad and click through to your website. So that was the first big success of this new logic.
In the online world, not in the real world, but in the online environment.
In the online world. Now, if you're going to be in a competition to produce great predictions about our behavior, it turns out that there are three things that you need. And these are what I call the economic imperatives. First of all, you need a lot of behavioral data. It started in online and then it went offline, right? Because it started with everything we do in searching and browsing and our social media behavior online. But then pretty soon they invented the smartphone, which is a little pocket-sized computer. You put it in your pocket or your purse, you take it out in the world with you, and you put a lot of apps on it. And those apps are streaming everything about what you're doing. The phone itself is streaming everything about your location and often, you know, what you're saying and what you're doing, what you're buying, what you're eating, who you're with, all of these kinds of data streams. So first we have volumes of data, and then the next thing we have are varieties of data, economies of scale and economies of scope. Mm-hmm. The machines need both of those things to make great predictions. Now, let's get to Pokemon Go. In the competition for great predictions, eventually surveillance capitalists understood that the very best predictions come from actually intervening in our behavior, learning how to tune, to herd, to shape and modify our behavior, pushing us in the direction that improves their predictions, because that makes their predictions more lucrative. It makes them worth more, and it improves their revenues. It makes them more competitive. This new arena is what I call economies of action. We have scale, we have scope, we have action. How do you get lots of people to behave in the way you want them to behave without ever meeting them, without ever touching them? This is not a situation where, you know, you've got the soldiers knocking on your door in the middle of the night, threatening you and dragging you off to the gulag or the camp. This is a kind of power to shape our behavior.
Soft power.
A kind of, it's a soft power. I call it instrumentarian power, because it works through the milieu, through the medium of digital instruments. And it works subliminally on our behavior. It triggers, it cues, it uses social comparison dynamics. It does these very subtle things in order to successfully shape and direct our behavior.
But when kids and children and adults were involved or engaged with Pokemon Go, they thought that they were just entertaining and having a good time, but something else was happening.
You're absolutely right. Okay, what was really happening was that the game we were playing was a game within a game. Economies of action, as I suggested, this is a new experimental zone. No one knows how to do this. And so both within Facebook and within Google, we saw very interesting new kinds of experiments being tried to figure out how to modify human behavior at scale. Pokemon Go is a game that was invented at Google. It was incubated at Google for many years by the same people who oversaw the Street View effort where they came to all of our neighborhoods and
Yes.
they recorded all of our streets and they mapped our neighborhoods and our cities and our homes. The same people who did Google Earth and who did Street View did Pokemon Go. And the real game here was that businesses, some of them very important global businesses like McDonald's and Starbucks, but others perhaps local businesses like the local pizzeria or the local bar. These businesses were paying the game for the privilege of having the game push people's behavior into these establishments where they would spend money.
Yes.
Right? So just as in the online world, you have advertisers paying for click-through rate,
Yes.
Which is how we walk with our fingers, clicking our way through. In this real world game of Pokemon Go, you had the McDonald's and the Starbucks paying the company that ultimately was spun off from Google to bring it to market because they didn't want to bring it to market as Google.
Yes.
So they brought it to market as something called Niantic Labs. These entities, these companies were paying Niantic Labs for guaranteed footfall. So instead of walking with our fingers online, we're walking with our real feet and our real bodies in the real world to go to those establishments where we would probably spend money.
Shoshana, this difference that while we are going from an online environment to the real life and making people without, they do not know that they are some way obeying a pattern that was created by a company. They are guided to a certain shop, a certain business. Why is this kind of different scale or different step worse and more worrying?
All right. Well, think about what we've just said. So now there are digital systems. In the case of Pokemon Go, of course, it's mediated by our phone, but the phone is not only full of sensors and the apps and so forth. When the forensic analysts looked at Pokemon Go, they realized that it was taking so much data from our phones that went way beyond anything that was necessary for us to play this game. That's because they're feeding these profiles of us and they're learning how to trigger our behavior with specific kinds of messaging, specific kinds of social comparison dynamics, subliminal cues. In the case of Pokemon Go and other forms of economies of action, they use gamification, real-time rewards and punishments, real-time rewards and punishments to get us to go this way, go that way, or behave this way, behave that way. So this was experimental, but it was incredibly successful. They learned that without game players ever knowing, completely outside of our awareness, they could successfully direct us to the places that they wanted us to go because that's where they were going to get paid. All right?
All right.
So here we have this new kind of power.
I have a question in this point, Shoshana. The big issue here is not they are not just predicting what we are freely going to do, but they are just creating what we are going to do. This is the main danger thing.
This is what is called, in psychology, is called behavior modification. And the idea is that you can use rewards and punishments, what psychologists call reinforcements. Very often they're subliminal, so we have no idea that they're occurring, but these can be used to shape our behavior. Now we have an economic logic, a form of capitalism that is using the density and intensity of digital instrumentation, which has become the environment in which we all live, starting with our phones and our computers, but the sensors, the cameras, the devices, Now it's becoming the television set, the dishwasher, the dashboard in my car, the sensors that are all through the city, and the platform that my doctor's office uses, or the platform that my children's school uses. All of these things are part of these ecosystems of data flows.
And so
all of this can be used to analyze us, to know how to trigger us and send us cues, get us involved in messages about what other people are doing and what friends of ours are doing that make us want to do it, and also sending us rewarding and punishing signals that shape our behavior. This now